Okay, so I owe you guys Amityville Part 3. And out of all the Amityville stuff we've discussed, this is going to be a lot of information. Alright, so we left off with the Lutz family fleeing their Amityville home after 28 days. They left basically with the shirt on their backs. They didn't take anything with them, and they went to a hotel. And they decided they don't think it's in their family's best interest to return back to the Amityville house. So this is when the Warrens get involved, Ed and Lorraine Warren. And they got involved actually because the news called them up and said, hey, do you know about the DeFeo murders? Of course. Well, we have a house that we think is haunted that was owned by the DeFeo family, and the family left that live there now. And they're saying it's haunted. We want to see what's going on. So, of course, Ed and Lorraine take on the case. And Ed and Lorraine want the Lutz family to go back to the house with them and do the walkthrough and to explain to them what happened that night that they fled, which I still don't know. It's hard to find on the internet. Lorraine won't talk about it. Well, wouldn't talk about it. The Lutz wouldn't talk about it. But George Lutz tells Ed Warren, I'm not going back in that house ever again. So Ed says, I understand. Is there anything you want me to get while I'm there? Because remember, they left everything. Well, he tells Ed, the only thing I'm really worried about is the deed to the house. Can you get me the deed to the house? So Ed was like, okay, tell me where it is. I'll get you the deed. So he gives Ed the keys to the house and the permission to check it out. And then Ed brings him back the deed. So Ed and Lorraine didn't just work solo. They had founded in 1952 the New England Society of Psychic Research, which is one of the oldest ghost hunting places in America. And not only was it Ed and Lorraine doing this, they had a team of medical doctors, nurses, photographers. They had cops training underneath them. They had people from the clergy. So a lot of people helped them. And that's why I say that the paranormal was looked at a lot differently back then than it is now, because it's so easy to call people kooks. But look at all these people that were invested in this case. And just so you know, Ed never claimed to have any kind of psychic powers. He became interested in the ghost world when he was a child. He had a neighbor that he was really scared of when the neighbor was alive. And then after the neighbor died, Ed said as a child he woke up to the neighbor in his room. Now, Lorraine was a clairvoyant and a light trance medium, which meant that she could see things that had happened, almost like pictures in a book in front of her. And with the light trance medium, she could do seances and communicate with the spirits. Now, Lorraine grew up in a very strict Catholic home, and she didn't know that she had this gift of clairvoyancy until in Catholic school she mentioned seeing something that she thought everybody could see. And the nuns were not happy. The nuns freaked out. So this taught Lorraine two things. This taught Lorraine, number one, nobody's going to believe you if you say anything. And number two, it's better to just keep your mouth shut. Anyways, Ed served in the military for quite a while. He and Lorraine were married, and they decided that they wanted to go in this together. And what they would do to investigate haunted houses is they would drive around, and if they saw a house that gave Lorraine weird vibes, Ed would paint the house. Ed was a really great artist. Ed would paint the house. They'd go up, knock on the door. Remember, this is the 50s and 60s. They'd go up, knock on the door, say, hey, we painted your house. We can give it to you for free if you'll give us like a brief rundown of the history of the house. Let us check it out. And a lot of times, homeowners were happy to do this. They wanted the picture of their home. And another thing I'd like to point out is that Ed and Lorraine never charged anybody that needed their help a dime. Nothing. It didn't matter if you caught them on Christmas Day. If they could get to you that day, they would get to you. And they would most of the time. And one of the first things they would be doing is ruling out anything that could be naturally freaking the homeowners out. old floorboards, rusty pipes, water damage, things like that. And most of the time it could be chalked up to just natural occurrences. But there are times when it could not be chalked up to natural occurrences. And I just figure if you are a ghost buster and you're in it for fame, you would charge the people that call you. But no, they did not charge anyone. I'm not saying they didn't make any money on book deals later on in their lives or TV appearances. You've probably seen The Conjuring 2, Annabelle. All of those are the Ed and Lorraine Warren cases. And in my opinion, I've got a book full of Ed and Lorraine Warren cases. There are some much scarier ones than that, eventually maybe we'll talk about. Now again, Ed didn't have any psychic powers. Ed would do the blessings. He had ties to the Catholic Church. He was a self-taught demonologist. I don't know how you teach yourself to be a demonologist. I don't know, but he was. And he was one of the rare people that the Catholic Church would let do an actual exorcism without a priest there. Let me break that down for you, because if you think getting an exorcism is easy, you are so wrong, because the Catholic Church wants proof. They want indisputable evidence. And that can take months to gather. And sometimes there are cases when families cannot wait months. And this is where Ed would step in and he would perform the exorcism because it just couldn't wait. So after getting their crew together, the first thing they do is let Lorraine do a walkthrough of the house. This is something Lorraine has to do at every haunting so that she can see what's going on. She will go from room to room as she's investigating. And even if she does see something that others cannot see, she would not acknowledge it. She would just keep walking around, seeing what she could see, feeling what she could feel. And then later, she would tell Ed whether she sensed anything there. And that's where they would go from. Well, Lorraine walks into Amityville and she is like, I don't want to be here. I do not want to be here. There's something really bad here. But she knows she's trying to help people. She knows that, the news wants this covered. So she goes in, and as she's walking through the house, she checks out the basement first. And remember what we talked about. The basement contained a crawl space-like area called the Red Room because it was painted red. Now remember, Butch DeFeo and Don DeFeo and their friends a lot of times used a Ouija board down there. It was like their kid hangout room. And that is where Butch DeFeo said that he heard the voices telling him to kill his family. Now, the Red Room was also the room that George Lutz became obsessed with after he moved into this house. So Lorraine discerns that there is something inhuman in this basement. So then she's walking upstairs. She's going towards Butch DeFeo's bedroom. And she said that something pushed her, almost like walking into an invisible wall. And she said that she was so overwhelmed that she had to just sit there and collect herself. And there is a photo of her just sitting on the stairs that lead up to Butch DeFeo's room in Amityville. So after Lorraine tells Ed there's something here, they get everything set up. They set up cameras, they set up their crew. They would even sleep there. Back then, you could always fake spirit photography, usually using double exposure. I don't really know much about photography or how that works. But now you can CGI a ghost into anything, any picture. But there is a picture of a child, just his head sticking around the corner of a bedroom door, and he's got wide eyes. And let me remind you, no families living there at this time. And there are no children involved in this investigation. And this child looks suspiciously a lot like John Matthew DeFeo, the youngest, who was murdered by Butch DeFeo. And I'm going to post this picture if you're a photographer. If you're a photographer, I want you to take a look at it and tell me your own thoughts on it, if you think it's real or not. Personally, I do. So, Ed says that he is physically shoved to the ground by an invisible force during religious provocation. And let me tell you a little about religious provocation. You ever see those "do not try this at home" warnings? This is my "do not try this at home" warning to you. because religious provocation, if there is an inhuman spirit, this is gonna piss that spirit off. Of course, that's what Ed wanted now. Ed wanted to piss the spirit off. Ed wanted it to show himself. Ed needed to know what he was dealing with. But again, do not try religious provocation on your own. It's dangerous. And to give you an idea of what religious provocation is, we see it every day, like in churches and stuff like that. It's when you pull out something holy that will piss off the supernatural. Now, Ed had a lot of ways of doing this so that the person he was doing it to was not really suspecting it. And the best case that I can explain to you what religious provocation is that once somebody brought their daughter to Ed Warren's office and they said something's wrong with her. She was 19 years old, and he said, there's just something wrong with our daughter, has been since she was born. And Ed said the daughter acted completely pleasant to him, and that she was very sweet and kind, but that something about her eyes made him uncomfortable. She looked like she wanted, in her eyes, she looked like she wanted to come out of her chair and attack him. So Ed makes an excuse to get up and go to the bookshelf behind him, which is also, and while he's behind her, he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a cross. There's no possible way that this girl can see this cross with her eyes. Her back is completely turned. He is completely behind her. He pulls out the cross, he holds it up behind her, and that's when the spirit came out and was basically calling Ed every name in the book and ready to kill him. So that is what religious provocation is. And it worked in Amityville. Let me tell you it worked. Now, I reached out to Lorraine's grandson, Chris. Chris is doing a lot of the Warren things now, and asked him what his grandmother had to say about the house. And he said, and I quote, "It is the closest to hell that I will ever want to be." Now, because of how bad Lorraine sensed this entity to be, Lorraine and Ed did not give a full account of what went down in that house, which is unusual for them. If you read their books or whatever, they usually give you the whole story. But after Amityville, Lorraine went home, locked herself in her bedroom for weeks, and wouldn't get out of bed. And she would not even tell Ed what she had seen in Amityville. So honestly, I can't tell you a lot of what they found other than she said that it was an inhuman spirit. You hear me mention inhuman spirit a lot. Inhuman spirit is a spirit that has never walked the earth in the form of a human being. So basically it is demonic. If it's a human spirit, it's a ghost, basically. So something in this house was demonic. So what could cause a house to have an inhuman spirit in it? Well, it turns out that 112 Ocean Avenue was built upon land that had once belonged to a man named John Ketchum. This is fact. You can look it up. John Ketchum was a known black magic practitioner, and he did not have the Amityville house, but the land was his. He had a small cottage built upon this land, and when he died, he wanted to be buried on this land, and he was buried on his land and still is buried on that land to this day. Then there was another native Indian tribe there that had used the land in the past to to drop off their mentally and physically unwell, basically leaving them there to die. So Lorraine's thoughts are that a home with so many negative thoughts, emotions, feelings, and actions that have been left imprinted on that land is going to be haunted. And not to mention, I told you guys that the Lutz family kept the DeFeo family furniture. But what caused the beginning of these hauntings? Why is Amityville bad for some people and not for others? Well, in 2013, the only Lutz child who would talk about the situation at all, Daniel, he did an interview, and it's a documentary. It's on Netflix. It's called My Amityville Horror. He's grown now. He reunited with Lorraine. But he dropped the bombshell. He dropped a bombshell that George, his stepfather, bought the house fully aware of the history, and that George was studying the occult, and that he brought lots of occult books into the home when they moved in. So this gives Lorraine the idea that the house was dormant after the DeFeo murders until the Lutz family moves in. And when I say that a haunting or a house is dormant, it means that the spirit is essentially asleep and needs to be woken up. And to wake it up, you have to have some kind of interest in it. Now, you might not mean to wake it up. So Butch DeFeo and Dawn DeFeo playing down in that red room with a lot of their supernatural stuff, that probably triggered it. And then George moving in with just all his occult stuff triggered it. And Lorraine also stated that there are 3 stages of demonic, I don't want to say possession, but here are the stages. Number 1 is infestation. That is when you have a presence in your home. It might be doing weird little things, but it's just started out. Oppression is when it starts to break down your free will. It starts to break down your mental capacity. You start feeling weak. You start feeling sad. And what it's doing, it is preparing to make you so spiritually weak that the 3rd and final stage can happen, possession. So Lorraine thinks that Butch DeFeo had reached stage number 3, that he had been possessed, and that is what caused him to murder his whole family. She believed that George Lutz had reached level 2, but was not far off from reaching level 3. He was not far from killing his entire family. So it's good that they got the hell out of there, all pun intended, when they did. I wish I could give you a happy ending, that they were able to exorcise this house, but they weren't. There was literally nothing they could do, and Lorraine was not willing to go back. And I tell you, if Lorraine Warren, who has investigated, to me, a lot of creepier cases than this, wasn't going to go back, that's telling me something. Well, the Lutz family, it doesn't end there, people. It doesn't end there. The Lutz family get contacted by Butch DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, or Weber, not sure how you pronounce it, but they get contacted by Butch DeFeo's lawyer. And this lawyer wants to work on a book deal with them. He sends them a contract. So basically, Butch DeFeo, who is serving 6 counts of second-degree murder and is never going to get out of prison, his lawyer is contacting the Lutz family and saying, hey, want to tell us about the haunted house? Let's do this. Let's make some money. The Lutz family actually turns him down. But then another man named Jay Anson, he comes to them, and he doesn't come to them, he contacts them, and he wants to do a book deal. They agree to work with Jay Anson. So Jay Anson writes The Amityville Horror in 1977. And this book was a sensation. I mean, we are coming off the time where The Exorcist just hit the theaters, all of that. This book was a sensation. So it was an international bestseller. This book was going to make some bank. And Weber, whatever his name is, he's mad because he wasn't in on this deal. He had sent the contract first. So he claims that Jay Anson himself and the Lutz family had all sat down over several bottles of wine and made this story up for publicity. And here's the kicker. This is really good. Turns out the Lutz family had never even met Jay Anson. So this does not check out. They never met him. For him to write the book, they sent him audio recordings of what happened by them telling him the story and him writing it down. So Weber's pissed he's cut out of this money opportunity, and he basically just tells this huge lie. Well, then he turns around and sells 2 stories to 2 very prominent magazines, and these get published. And he is basically slandering the Lutz family. And the Lutz family sues Jay Anson and Weber for over $4 million for damage to their mental health and for not respecting their privacy. And basically, Weber and Anson countersue with the whole "we made this crap up." The judge looks at the story, and the judge says, "No, I don't believe in haunted houses. Case dismissed. No, forget about it." So that's what went down with the lawsuit. And then the Amityville Horror, the movie starring Margot Kidder and James Brolin, comes out. I forgot to tell you guys this. The judge does throw the case out, but he has some pretty strong words for Weber. I don't know. We're just going to say Weber. He has some pretty strong words for him. He basically tells him that he is scum of the earth because Butch DeFeo is his client, and he is trying to snag a book deal about his own client and the families that moved in after the murders. So there's a conflict of interest there, and the judge does tell Weber that he was unethical. Residents who have lived there since the DeFeo family and since the Lutz family have said they have not experienced anything supernatural, but again, could be that the entity is laying dormant. It could be that it was a hoax. Do I think it was a hoax? I think there were some parts that were exaggerated. I don't think there was green slime coming down the walls. I mean, come on now. No. I would believe blood was dripping down the walls before I believe green slime was dripping down the walls. But do I think that the Lutz family made everything up? No. Because if they did, I would have thought that they would have come up with something just crazy that would have happened the night that they fled that house. And they still have, even to their death, never really talked about what happened in that house. So I think that would be the moneymaker. I want to know. I do. You guys already know I'm a believer in the paranormal, so I don't think it was a hoax. The theories that went around were that George and Kathy could not afford this house, so they fled to keep from having to pay the mortgage payment. But here's what doesn't make sense about that. They only lived there 28 days. They moved in December 18th. And 28 days later, they fled. That's not enough time to even have your first mortgage payment come due. Their finances were fine. They had actually put a very large down payment on the Amityville house. So that does not make sense to me at all. I am also a believer in the Warrens, again, because I feel like if you were out to do this for money, you would be charging people. I would be charging people. Also, our own U.S. government hired the Warrens to investigate West Point, a military academy. So that's a big deal. They also had cops training under them, nurses, doctors. They taught college courses. Back then, you could actually get a degree in paranormal psychology. I'm not going to release the address of the Amityville house now. I did tell you it used to be 112 Ocean Avenue, but out of respect for the owners who changed the address, I am not going to tell you the address. They also changed the windows, the iconic windows. If you've seen the Amityville house, you know what windows I'm talking about. They've changed those windows so the house will be less recognizable. I know I wouldn't want a bunch of people on my street staring at my house, so I get it. But again, there really just was not a happy, conclusive ending to the Amityville. But Ed and Lorraine Warren had a ton of other cases, and in my opinion, scarier cases than what you've seen on The Conjuring, on Annabelle. So you'll probably hear me talk a lot about them in cases. Ed died in 2006. Lorraine died last year in 2019. They have the Occult Museum.